Truman does a Hitler. That's word for word what they say. Truman does a Hitler. Well, that's pretty heavy, man. Yeah. July 7th, 1952. I've spoken several times about the crisis in artillery shell production. There's just not enough of it in the US for all of the Army's needs. But you know what could make that even worse? The steelworkers strike. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the big news was the UN's massive aerial bombing campaign of the North Korean hydroelectrical complex, and the power was cut in most of North Korea and even parts of northeastern China. In the field, there was bloody fighting for the hill they call Old Baldy, and South Korean President Syngman Rhee had interfered in so much local stuff that UN command were considering a coup. This week, however, the situation, at least in Busan, between Rhee and the National Assembly, has gotten better. Well, Rhee has basically won. On July 3rd, the National Assembly amends the South Korean constitution as Rhee wanted, so the president is now directly and popularly elected by the people, and Rhee feels he can win that this year, as opposed to being chosen by the Assembly to serve another term. He wasn't certain he could win that. And they have established a second legislative chamber. Rhee has not ended martial law in the region yet, however. He declared it based on the excuse of increased guerrilla activity in the far south. And to be fair, there are still guerrilla raids down there. In fact, the ROK, the South Korean 1st Division, is pulled out of the line and sent to southwestern Korea to try and eliminate this. This has been tried before, with only middling success, so we'll soon see if it works any better this time. Off the south coast of Korea this week on July 2nd, the Red Cross finally physically returns to Koji Island. They have pretty harshly rebuked UN Commander Mark Clark for the POWs killed here in the recent cleanup actions, but they're still generally supportive of the UN side of things. Of course, the general treatment of POWs, which the communists have accused the UN of torturing and murdering, was not the communists' only accusation this summer. The communists tried side gambits in what was now primarily a propaganda war, such as the germ warfare accusations. While it was true that wholesale epidemics, mainly typhus, raged over North Korea, this was due to the ravages of war, the destruction caused by the continual United States air bombardment, and the passage of huge, unwashed Chinese armies across a land lacking sanitation and medical facilities, not deliberate seeding of virulent bacteria by Americans. There is still fighting this week for the hilltop called Old Baldy. The night of the 3rd and the morning of the 4th, the Chinese make 3 assaults, the last one at battalion level. But much like with last week's attacks, defensive firepower first blunts the attacks and then just plain forces them to stop. As I said before, last week saw the massive UN aerial assault on the North Korean hydroelectric complex, and the power is still out. We also saw a pretty strong negative British reaction to this. Well, really, it was more about being kept in the dark that it was going to happen. And as a result of all this, a British representative is now appointed to the UN command staff. When Matt Ridgway had been UN commander, he had rejected this when it was proposed, since he didn't like the idea of making an exception for the British, since then maybe all the other countries who have troops in Korea would request the same. Current UN Commander Mark Clark has told the Joint Chiefs of Staff that he's open to having a British staff officer. And in Britain, to diffuse some of the noise from the opposition, Prime Minister Winston Churchill says July 1st they will name a representative soon. Jumping the gun, it will be General Stephen Shoesmith, who is designated a Deputy Chief of Staff with UN Command. His directive is specific, that he is a normal staff officer, and liaison between the US and the UK will go on as it has so far, through normal political and military channels in DC and Korea. As for the actual bombing campaign, back in May, Recon had discovered new military targets near the North Korean capital Pyongyang, and Far Eastern Air Forces Commander Otto Wayland told Clark they should hit them. The thing that worries Clark about this is that they know the communists have a POW camp in the area, Camp Number 9. But though they know it's somewhere around there, they don't know exactly where. And you don't want to hit it. But his guys say that if they do a big airstrike on the Pyongyang environs, it should be visually based or with short-range navigational beacons so they don't hit the camp by mistake. If that's the plan, then go ahead, says Clark. On the 5th, the attack is scheduled for next week on the 11th. Speaking of bombs, I've talked several times about the UN's artillery shell crisis, especially the shortage of shells for 155mm howitzers, which are preferred for their bunker-busting capacity and also their longer range for counter-battery fire. U.S. Army Chief of Staff Lieutenant Joe Collins has shared some uncomfortable hard production facts with Mark Clark. Right now, roughly 100,000 such shells are coming off the factory lines each month. This will climb to 650,000 a month in about a year. Well, Clark wants to have 40 rounds a day for each of his 486 such guns, which requires 583,000 rounds a month, right? Collins says, well, we'll hit that figure around next March. So for the 4-month period now, from July 1st to October 31st, without firing any guns in training and without leaving the guns in Europe stupidly short of shells, the Army will give Clark a total of 450,000 rounds. Maybe a bit more, but not much. Okay, if there is a major communist attack, they say, sure, fire what you need to stop it, but anything higher than 15 rounds a day is going to take time to replace. This has been made even more complicated by the US Steelworkers strike. Oh yes, the United Steelworkers of America Union is on strike against 10 steelmakers, including US Steel. I'll get technical here for a minute, because this is really interesting. On March 20th, the U.S. government's Wage Stabilization Board issued a report of recommendations having to do with wage increases for steelworkers for a new contract that had been argued and proposed and opposed for months. The recommendation, though, not only had nothing in it about cost of living adjustments down the line, but with the length of the contract, kind of ensured that inflation would outpace the wage increases there were. The reactions were negative all over. The steel industry itself said it would need a big increase in the price of steel to stay solvent if they did this. Most Republicans and also a lot of Democrats in Congress were against it. The media called it payback to the Union for supporting Truman, but Truman was also against it at first, saying it would be destabilizing economically. He did have a change of heart, and negotiations began, but they weren't going much anywhere. So Truman considered the government seizing control of the steel mills, says he was told even a 10-day strike would hurt the war effort in Korea, slow down atomic weapons projects, and prevent the U.S. from meeting international commitments, which might encourage the Soviets. A strike was called by the Union for April 9th, but on the 8th, Truman said, hold off, he was taking control of the mills. So let's meet up and make a new collective bargaining agreement. So they called off the strike, even though Commerce Secretary Charles Sawyer said he has no intention of giving steelworkers a pay raise. The New York Daily News said of this seizure, Truman does a Hitler, and virtually all media outlets condemned it. The steel companies sued the government, and the D.C. District Judge, Judge David Pine, ruled, there is no express grant of power in the Constitution authorizing the president to direct this seizure. There is no grant of power from which it reasonably can be implied. There is no enactment of Congress authorizing it. The government got a stay of appeals until May 2nd. Then the Supreme Court takes up the case, and on June the 2nd, they rule 6-3 that the president does not have the authority under the Constitution to seize private property in the name of national security. And Congress has not given him the authorization here either, so he cannot do it. The steelworkers go on strike hours after the ruling. Layoffs in steel-dependent industries begin already June 4th. Companies that use steel for consumer products begin getting steel denied to them from national defense authorities, and exports of steel are banned June 10th. By the 17th, some defense plants have shut down or are running at heavily reduced capacity. By the 21st, automakers are shutting down production since their stocks are nearly gone. This can all only be a bad thing for artillery shell production as well, and indeed it has worsened the situation. Pittsburgh's Christie Park plant, which is responsible for well over half of those 155mm shells, has already lost production of 60,000 by July. This week on the 5th, Army Secretary Frank Pace tells Secretary of Defense Robert Lovett he should bring that fact to the attention of both labor and management, but the strike continues. Speaking of American politics and politicians. The American Republican Party's National Convention begins today, July 7th. It will run until the 11th. As I mentioned some weeks ago, this will be televised coast to coast now that over a third of American households have a TV set. And it is the first political convention to be so broadcast. Both the Republican and Democratic parties did some regional broadcasting in 1948, but that was small potatoes. Ike, war hero Dwight Eisenhower, and Ohio Senator Robert Taft are the frontrunners for the Republican presidential nomination. Now, there's been some machinations just ahead of the convention. According to the New York Times, in the states Texas, Georgia, and Louisiana, where there's not a whole lot of organized Republican action because they traditionally do very poorly there, Eisenhower backers had charged Taft forces during the nomination campaign with improperly seeking to obtain Southern delegate strength. It was on the contested delegate issue that General Eisenhower and Senator Taft fought before this convention after the Ohioans' challenged delegations had been upheld by the Taft-dominated National Committee. Okay, the Republican National Committee supports Taft in this, but when the delegate committees meet, they support Ike. So 42 delegates from those states are stripped from Taft and given to Eisenhower, and suddenly he's a real frontrunner. Douglas MacArthur is stumping for Taft, and he is the convention's keynote speaker, and that keynote speech is tonight, the 7th. MacArthur's only chance to thrust himself back into national prominence was his keynote address. If he could excite the delegates sufficiently, perhaps he could yet swing the convention to Taft or to himself. As for how his speech goes, even to friendly observers, the speech was one of the poorest of his career. His voice frequently broke, and he bobbed up and down as if trying to give emphasis to key sentences. He said nothing but sheer baloney, wrote C.L. Sulzberger of the New York Times. One could feel the electricity gradually running out of the room. I think he cooked his own goose and didn't do much to help Taft. MacArthur, a hero to many conservatives, argues the U.S. is suffering a decline in global strength. He calls the Democratic Party the party of war, but also says it is fatal to enter any war without the will to win it. He attacks the Truman administration, particularly its handling of inflation, since there is now an environment in which wages often do not keep pace with post-World War II prices. The televised speech is filmed for posterity, of course, and I don't know if there's ever, if there ever happens to be some sort of a search, like a motor or engine, all right? A machine where you can just type in the words MacArthur keynote address 1952 or whatever, and then you could watch the film of it. Well, I'm pretty certain that it would be there, and it's worth a watch to see the old fella's last moment in the spotlight. It's like 40 minutes long. Taft's followers are pretty rambunctious and really scream out the convention's main undercurrents. Traitors at the highest level of the Red Dean's government, referring to Secretary of State Dean Acheson. The virulently anti-communist Wisconsin Senator Joe McCarthy says this: "We can't fight communists in the Acheson-Lattimore fashion of hitting them with a perfumed silk handkerchief at the front door, while they batter our friends with brass knuckles at the back door." California Senator Richard Nixon blares out, "The American people have had enough of the whining, whimpering, groveling attitude of our diplomatic representatives, who speak of America's fears rather than America's strengths and of America's courage." Well, like I say, it's pretty lively. We'll see how it goes. I wonder who's going to win the nomination. And then we get the Democratic Party convention starting the 21st, also in Chicago. Super political month in the USA. And here, I will leave you for the week, with MacArthur again in the spotlight. A steelworker strike that cannot but help affect the Korean War. Syngman Rhee getting his way and bombing and fighting as usual. And think if Truman had taken government control of the steel industry. I bet everybody would have been real happy about that. But I guess if you're not running again for any office at all, maybe you don't care what the papers say, and you think you're doing what's best for your country, I guess. But man, if Truman had done that, or if he somehow does do that, comes up with some way that the Supreme Court says is kosher, it will set an incredibly dangerous precedent. Get your popcorn. Well, stay right here to follow the war, the election, and Lord knows what else that turns up as 1952 rolls along. And join the Time Ghost Army to allow me continue to do this, because that is what does it. You can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army, and Joe Buck, like Midnight Cowboy, right? Okay, he's the Army member of the week here. Hey, Joe, M-O-N-Y, that spells money. If you get it, you get it. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.